Welcome back to another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm your host, Steven Roy Goodman. I'm here in Washington, D.C., where we're going to be speaking about citizen diplomacy and public diplomacy. And I have two guests with me today. The first one is Sherry Mueller, who is a distinguished practitioner of residence at American University and also the former director of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. And then my second guest is Pauline Yang, who is a U.S. envoy and an expert pianist who you will be hearing from not only in terms of speaking, but her beautiful piano playing as well. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for coming. And maybe, Sherry, if we can start with you, if you can explain, because I get a little confused about this, what's the definition of citizen diplomacy and public diplomacy? What's the difference?
Well, I would define citizen diplomacy as the concept that the individual citizen has the opportunity, even the responsibility to help shape foreign relations. And we used to say pre-pandemic, one handshake at a time. Now we're getting back to that again. But person to person, often through international exchange programs. I define public diplomacy as the official government effort to reach out to publics abroad and influence their opinion with the ultimate goal of engaging more cooperation for the host country who's engaging in the public diplomacy activity. And public diplomacy activity would include broadcasting, international exchanges, cultural diplomacy, and other forms of communicating with publics abroad, with the hope that those publics would then, of course, influence their own leaders in a way that's in the host government's best interest. So one of the key differences between public and citizen diplomacy is public diplomacy is government funded in general. Citizen diplomacy is self-funded or funded by NGOs. Sometimes they overlap, and be glad to give you an illustration of that if that would be helpful.
Well, I think that would be helpful, but if we can first turn to Pauline, because you're an example of a person who does exactly that, and I'm assuming sometimes you do it for the government and other times you may just travel and interact with other musicians.
That's correct, and even beyond musicians, just audiences in general. And it's been extremely rewarding to get to participate in both kinds of diplomacy. So when I do a public diplomacy trip as a U.S. arts envoy for the State Department, then that is in an official capacity where it's run by the government and it's funded by the government. And when I'm doing just a regular concert tour that's not sponsored by the government, then that also would be an example of the citizen diplomacy side. And even if I'm not necessarily interacting with other musicians on certain concert tours that are unrelated to the government, even when I'm interacting with audiences and the media, there are still occasions to be that citizen diplomat as well.
And have you had some challenging moments as a citizen diplomat when people, maybe they love your music, but then they say, well, you know, I don't like what the XYZ government has done, or a position that happened yesterday?
Oh, sure, and that has happened on my tours as both a citizen diplomat and as an arts envoy. But I always try to tell everyone who I meet that I'm not representing an administration. I'm representing the country overall in terms of public diplomacy and through the arts in public diplomacy. And so it's the arts that is my means of bringing audiences together. And I wish that that there are certain times, there may not be many, but that there could be certain times and spaces where politics do not have to be involved, and where that's a space where everyone can come together just to be able to appreciate the music and to be able to unite and to build trust from that initial interaction, which could help further deepen and foster mutual understanding.
When speaking of that mutual understanding, Sherry, in terms of diplomats who get together from country X and country Y, presumably both countries' diplomats are trying to make a positive impression and influence the other. But in the arts, it's kind of a way of that happening in a kind of softer, more polite way. Do you agree with that thesis?
Sure. I mean, I think I do believe that people distinguish between a government's and a particular administration policy and the people of a country. And the arts, and there are other examples too, sports diplomacy, culinary diplomacy. Think about the chefs, around the world who have really brought the world closer together through food. And there are organizations of chefs to heads of state that the French started, of course, the French would do it. And I just think it's so essential because it's so important for people to understand the general history, heritage, culture, and values of a country, as well as to get beyond the headlines and have a context for what a particular administration or government is doing, I would think.
And that can be kind of interesting because let's say you mentioned sports diplomacy, right? I mean, people love sports around the world. And so there could be a big soccer match, a basketball game, something else. Then all of a sudden people are interacting on a non-governmental level.
Steve, if I won the lottery, what I would do is I would establish exchange programs and send U.S. coaches around the world to interact with students. I'd also send more high school teachers. We have a very small exchange program under the Fulbright program to send high school teachers abroad. And I just think we need to get people interested in international affairs at as young as possible. And so, anyway, if you have that lottery ticket, I'll be glad to recruit the coaches because they do such a good job in general. And I'm thinking of one that I know very well who also happens to be my personal trainer, and he's established an organization called Beyond the Hoop to really encourage not only excellent basketball skills, but excellent tutoring for students and an emphasis on academia as well. And he would be able to cross these cultural boundaries very well with his basketball coaching skills. So, just one example.
Well, that's a great example. And if we can bring this to music a little bit as well. So when you're meeting other musicians and performers around the world, how are you interacting with them? Are you spending time at sound checks? Are you spending time the night before in the hotel? Are you performing with them? How are you interacting with them?
It usually spans an entire mix. So sometimes I will collaborate with them in a chamber music performance. So that would mean anywhere between a duo or a duet with another instrumentalist or a singer, all the way to potentially with the piano, I would say, let's say a quintet. But normally I'm also doing a lot of master classes where I'm working with local musicians. And that has been, I've been told by the students, quite inspiring because in a lot of the places where I've been on behalf of the U.S. government, a lot of these students who have been trying to pursue their music studies for their entire lives have never had the opportunity or exposure to an international performer or pedagogue. And so it's really wonderful when they have the opportunity to have this at their fingertips and where they don't have to pay a cent and they realize how much goodwill there is from the U.S. government when they do send either myself or one of my colleagues abroad to work with these students and to share what we have been so lucky to learn from our own teachers, from our international training. So master classes have been one example. Sometimes it's workshops where I'm talking to students about the roles of music in diplomacy because many people, not only musicians, but many people have never thought about or heard of this concept. And that also has inspired, again, as I've been told by the students afterward, that inspired them to consider pursuing either something similar or if they're not a musician but have another passion to somehow be able to relate that with diplomacy so that it just opens up so many more doors and possibilities for them both personally and professionally. So there have been a lot of different ways in which I've been able to interact with musicians and beyond in all my travels.
Well, that's really great. And on average, this might be hard to answer, but on average, how old are the students?
Normally, the target audience for the students who I've worked with have been at the college age, and so usually in conservatories and sometimes the graduate level as well. But I've also tried to request getting to work with high school students as well and younger. So for example, when I was in Nigeria, one of the schools was a school for blind children, and that was at the elementary age. And at that particular school, there was no piano where I could perform for them or to work with them on, but they sang for me, and they were a very musical bunch. And then I had prepared some recordings that the embassy staff and I were able to play for them, and then we got their feedback after that, and we discussed music diplomacy and music in general with them. There was also another school on that same trip, which was at the elementary level as well, and that was a more music-focused school, actually, and of which there are not that many music-focused elementary schools around the world, but this one was quite special, and I just had so much fun getting to work with these young children, and I hope I inspired them. They certainly inspired me. I remember there was a little girl who was maybe just 4 or 5 years old, and she wanted to perform for me. And she showed up with her little pink cello. I had never seen a pink cello before, and not only was it pink, but it had stickers all over it. And it wasn't the stickers to mark the notes on the strings for intonation and pitch. It was a star sticker, a heart sticker. It was just adorable. And to see what the kids, or how much joy the kids got out of music, and that they wanted to share it with me, just made me so happy that it could be an exchange even at that level.
That's a terrific story. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
In terms of, let's bring this back to the basketball and the music kind of interaction. There must be all these things that people do that they enjoy around the world that have nothing to do with government X, Y, or Z. They just enjoy playing sports. They might love basketball. They might like playing it. They might like watching it. They might like listening to music. Maybe they like to play music. Why don't more countries do this?
Well, I think many countries do it. We're just not as aware of it. And one point I'd like to make here, Steve, is the fact that we're all citizen diplomats. Most of us don't realize it, but we're all in the business of interacting with people from other cultures, other countries on often a daily basis. For example, at the university, I remind my students, you may be sitting next to an international student, or there may be an international scholar who's your TA. How you treat each other, how you treat that student will be, you're citizen diplomats. That student will take home their ideas of what the United States is and what we value from the interaction they have, and also from what they observe as we interact with each other. So that notion that everybody is a citizen diplomat, I think, is something that we really need to promote and help people understand. And as you point out, there are so many ways that people do interact, whether it's through business interactions. I guess one thing I would suggest about both citizen and public diplomacy is that they provide the web of human connections that really then become the context for other kinds of negotiations, whether it's trade pacts, whether they invite the Minnesota Symphony to come to South Africa. Whatever decisions are made, they're made within that context of human connections that underpin foreign relations in general.
And can I tag something on to that? I completely agree with all of that. And actually, the National Museum of American Diplomacy right here in Washington, D.C. currently has up on their website an entire page titled Who is a Citizen Diplomat and Who Can Be a Citizen Diplomat? And the answer is everyone. And so they do go on to list a couple of examples of what people can do in order to help themselves realize that every citizen is constantly on as a representative of the community, perhaps at the most local level, and then all the way up to the country, especially when when engaging with international visitors and or when traveling abroad. And so some of the examples that the museum lists would be learning a foreign language and considering studying abroad or hosting someone from overseas. And so there are so many different ways, but indeed everybody is a citizen diplomat.
Well, let's drill down a little bit more in terms of citizens and diplomacy in terms of music. So without giving a trade secret away, where do the musicians go when no one else is looking, when they could spend time with each other?
Well, there's always a lot of time spent in the practice room, that's for sure, at the conservatory level during those years when we're all in school. And then afterwards, when we all go out into the world, we generally do try to reconnect with each other. And sometimes it may just be as casual as at a restaurant, but or sometimes it might be after a friend's concert. We'll get together at a hotel lobby just to be able to debrief about how the performance went, what's coming up on each other's performing schedules, and also how we could potentially be of help, whether it's helping someone make another connection, or if it's a specific question about a particular piece that's coming up on the repertoire. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of engagement amongst musicians, but I wouldn't say there's a particular place that we all would get together at.
Well, let me press you a little bit on that, if I may.
Sure.
Because I think it would be really interesting to be a fly on the wall for musicians who are trying things out before they perform. That's what I thought would be really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely play for each other. Yeah, behind. Oh, I see what you mean. Sure. Before there's a big concert, for example, one never wants for the first run through of a program to be on stage at Carnegie Hall, and so we will run our programs for each other in our living rooms. We'll try to play for our teachers again, and sometimes it may be just one-on-one for a friend, just to get some extra trusted ears to give us some feedback. And that's always very helpful. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that musicians are also often gathering at music festivals. And sometimes it's at workshops or conferences, and that's oftentimes a helpful setting in which the whole point is for musicians to come together to discuss either current issues in the performer's life right now in general, and how everyone can help each other, and or on a pedagogical standpoint, how teachers can help further music education, whether here in the U.S. or abroad.
Well, and speaking of the teachers, at American University or other universities, what can students do to learn some of these softer skills now? I realize you pointed out that people are indeed citizen diplomats inherently, but perhaps students don't realize that. Are there particular courses that students could take at AU or some other university that might help them in that journey?
Well, I teach a Skills Institute on International Exchange, Cultural Diplomacy, and Protocol, for example. So there are courses. Another avenue would be to go to the university or college's International Programs Office, and there are events they can volunteer for, and also learn about the exchange programs and the other opportunities. And one of the important things is some of the exchange programs, you don't have to go for a whole semester or a whole year to study abroad, although it's great if you can get a Fulbright grant and do that. But it's also very useful to perhaps take a practicum that spends 3 weeks of the practicum time in Costa Rica or Ghana. So there are all kinds of opportunities. Professors who teach international courses are always usually language teachers in particular, would be knowledgeable about these kinds of things, but also the International Programs Office at the university is just full of opportunities to practice citizen diplomacy on an afternoon or for a semester.
And would you say that's true for universities not in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles?
Absolutely. I was speaking at Oklahoma State University last year about this time and totally impressed with their international student population, their programs on public diplomacy and global affairs. So absolutely true, whether you're at USC or Vanderbilt.
And what about faculty members? How can faculty members work abroad for a short amount of time or a longer amount of time?
Well, one of the things that's happening now, of course, is the State Department's budget for international exchange programs. There's a lot of support for it, even though there have been some cuts proposed. So there are still Fulbright grants. There are still other grants that professors and staff can be part of. They also may want to be part of a local sister cities delegation. There are community organizations that people can look at, and there are often business through local chambers of commerce, business delegations that will go abroad, depending on, of course, the profession of a particular individual. But there are a lot of options, and I think people sometimes think it's more formidable to do this kind of activity than it really is.
And what about just getting on an airplane and over winter break and going with 3 friends of yours who may be musicians or maybe they're not musicians and just going to XYZ place?
Well, a fun book I like to recommend is Travel as a Political Act by Rick Steves. A lot of your TV audience will be familiar with his programs, and absolutely, I've a dear friend of mine who's 20 she's studying chemical engineering at the University of Washington in Seattle. She has 6 years of Mandarin and spent the summer on an exchange program, a critical language exchange program. And she said it was the most transformative experience of her life. Well, 20. But I can't encourage people enough. I think it's, yes, you get out of your comfort zone, but you learn so much about yourself, about your own country, when you're abroad representing it.
Well, thank you both for representing what you're saying today. And before we say goodbye, Pauline, could you say a word or two about what you're going to play?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to be playing the Petri transcription of Bach's Sheep May Safely Graze cantata. And I love getting to play this piece all over the world because I once opened a New Year's concert in Germany with this piece in 2012, and an audience member said afterward that she wished that I would consider opening every concert for the rest of my career with this piece because she found it to be so serene for the opening of that evening and of the year.
Pauline and Sherry, thank you so much for your comments today. If you would like additional information about the show, please go ahead and send an email to highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. And thank you for watching. After Pauline performs the serene piece that she just described, we will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.